You are listening to the Where It Counts podcast, a place for educational and nuanced perspectives, with your host, Haven.
Hey guys, it's been a while. It's been a smooth month since the last time we were able to spend some time together. And I don't know if you guys heard, but history was fucking made, like crazy shit. And Blue Ivy, she dropped that audiobook of Hair Love, and that was just like, she's a wonderful little kid, man. Very cool of her. Safari and Erica Mena of Love and Hip Hop broke up, and that's just like, if they can't make it, who can? Who can? What else has been happening in this country that's been pretty big? Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the presidential election. And that's just been a joy, a pure joy to witness, because everyone has been acting exactly as you expect them to act. So you have liberals and centrists and pundits on liberal mainstream media punching left and blaming the loss of Democratic seats in the House and the Democrats' inability to flip the Senate on people who are fighting to defund the police because they're tired of dealing with decades long of state-sanctioned murder of citizens and shit, and of course also on people who want to have health care during a pandemic, those selfish motherfuckers. And that's all happening, while Donald Trump is being a bitch baby about losing the election. So he's busy not helping anybody and only trying to help himself to prolong the inevitable transfer of power to the Biden-Harris administration, all while encouraging his white supremacist Proud Boys to go out into cities like DC and attack people and stab people and, try to murder motherfuckers. And white supremacist enablers are busy circling the wagons around those assholes to tell everybody why that behavior is okay. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of Corona because, that bitch is still here. And not only is she still here, she is running fucking rampant across our nation. Every single state is seeing an astronomical jump of coronavirus cases. And, that shouldn't be alarming or anything like that. We're only going to be looking at 260,000 American deaths and possibly 300,000 deaths by January, because despite the fact that our leadership in Congress said that they would reconvene after the election to figure out a way to provide some stimulus relief so that people can afford to stay home and inoculate themselves and others from the virus. It's been 2 weeks since after the election and nothing's come of that. So that seems promising. What else has been going on? The mass evictions caused by the pandemic-induced recession, those are still happening. So that's cool. A lot of people losing their homes and shit. Food bank lines are still longer than a motherfucker, you know what I'm saying? Nobody got health care. Nobody's material conditions have improved. And everybody's just playing fuck games, just the typical run-of-the-mill apple pie American shenanigans, And I just hope, despite my facetiousness, that you guys are maintaining your sanity and joy, because it looks like we're going to need as much of that as possible, because things could very well get worse before it gets better. And a lot of people are going to suffer. So if you're listening to the podcast and you are wondering what I look like or what my mannerisms are or how expressive my face might be, well, you don't have to worry anymore about that, because you can watch this podcast now. I know. I know, it's momentous. It's momentous. If you guys can just do me a favor, if you want, hop on YouTube real quick, type Where It Counts Pod, right? We'll pop up and, go ahead and subscribe and and, do all that shit that the motherfuckers at the end of YouTube videos do and say and ask and hook a nigga up. You know what I'm saying? I'm just out here trying to get in where I fit in under the immense pressure of surviving in America, So Do me that solid. Without further ado, I would like to dive into the current event that is unfolding in Africa. And I want to do this not just because of its implications of U.S. foreign policy in Africa, but also because these events highlight a lot of features of American policy and action that I think is very detrimental to us domestically and internationally, right? And unfortunately, I think that because of everything that's happening, this story is going to be lost in the sauce. And what's going on is kind of unprecedented in a way that I think might rear its head up again and blow up later on down the road. So under a Biden administration, something big might be happening. And for other people, that might be a surprise because no one's paying attention right now. So I'm hoping that this episode plants a seed for you guys to nourish and keep in the back of your mind so that if it does come up again, you will be able to better assess what's going on and the reaction that might come from the Biden-Harris administration. On Friday the 13th, November 13th, the 4-decade-long ceasefire between the Polisario Front in Western Sahara and Morocco ended when U.S.-backed Moroccan military forces invaded the southern part of Western Sahara and broke through a blockade and started to exchange fire with the Polisario Front forces. And this is unprecedented because this level of violence has not been seen since 1991. And as it stands, Polisario Front advocates and activists are out recruiting for more volunteers to fight for independence from Morocco. That can only mean more escalation of violence. Now, for some context, Western Sahara is considered Africa's last colony. And with that title comes all of the fixings that comes with being a colony, including the exploitation, the abuse of the people living in the territory, and the unanimous support of the global north for these atrocities. Morocco acquired control over Western Sahara in 1975. And from that point on, there has been an ebb and flow of violence between Western Sahara people against Moroccan forces. And all of it is just to try to expel the Moroccan forces. And the reason why Western Sahara is so coveted is because it is rich in resources like phosphate and fish. And these resources are extracted and stolen from the people. They don't get to benefit from any of the revenue that's generated from it. And they're also subjugated to violence under the occupation of this foreign force. Now, how the global north has responded to this has been somewhat typical historically. You have the UN, who has basically been a performative front of opposition to Morocco's occupation there. Most of the time, they just wag their finger and say, Morocco, we don't like that you're there. And then nothing fucking happens. They haven't really promoted or pushed any policy or resolution that would help expel Morocco out of the territory. They have come up with different types of votes to see whether or not countries in the UN want to recognize Morocco's sovereignty of the region, but those have failed so far. And that's as far as the UN has gone. On the other end, you also have the United States government, and the US's part in this is typical. Even back during the Gerald Ford presidency, you had Henry Kissinger, that angel of death, who even would go so far as to talk about how he hoped that the vote to recognize Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara would be rigged so that the Moroccans could take over. This is generally the feel that U.S. foreign policy has had with this situation, which is basically on the side of Morocco, but we're not going to acknowledge it officially. Now, other global North nations have not been so complicit in this violence. You have protests in Spain and New Zealand that are showing solidarity to the Polisario Front and for Western Sahara independence. But those relatively go ignored. Now, what's interesting about this escalation of violence is that just mere hours prior to the Moroccan forces going in and ending the ceasefire, a U.S. Army general met with the Moroccan generals. And obviously, there was some type of exchange where there was a understanding that this escalation of force would be tolerated at least. And the deaths that come with this type of occupation and violence has been tolerated by the United States. There have been mass graves found all throughout Western Sahara. There have been activists and independence fighters who have had their homes raided. Moroccan drones have been used in the area. And of course, a lot of this would not be possible without military aid from the United States. However, as it stands, no country recognizes Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. What can we make of this situation? Well, first, I would like to point out that a large portion of the Polisario Front are women. So a lot of the victims that have been killed by Moroccan forces, a lot of the victims of repression of protests have been women. And these activists have lost. They've gotten their eyes gouged out by Moroccan forces. They've been beaten. They've been killed. And it's really hard to understand what's going on the ground because the Moroccan government has basically made it impossible for foreign press to get into the territory to actually see what's going on. It wasn't until 2016 where Democracy Now! Was able to sneak into the territory and interview these freedom fighters and be able to share their story. And the United States government has pretty much turned a blind eye to all of this. And I find that relationship interesting, mostly because I see so much of a similarity between how U.S. foreign policy has moved in this area and others with how Donald Trump moves in his day-to-day life. Morocco is growing to be the number one customer of U.S. military weapons. Just this last year alone, Morocco has spent $1 billion on military weaponry from the United States. And they do this to curry favor or to signal to the U.S. government that they are willing to negotiate and be on their side and create a symbiotic relationship with the United States in order to maintain their control of the territory. And that's a lot like how people get favors from Donald Trump and his administration. You buy a bunch of his shit, you praise him, you tell him you're going to do everything that you need to do for him. The next thing you know, you're getting hookups. So because things are set up that way, we are funding a lot of these atrocities that are happening in Western Sahara. And not only that, we are fostering instability in the region in general. Because once fighting starts to escalate, there's a good chance that Moroccan forces will chase Polisario Front forces into their enclaves in Algeria, further involving yet another actor in this event. So there is a good chance of complete destabilization of Northwest Africa. And aside from buying a bunch of our weapons, another tactic that Morocco has done, or has at least floated around to see if they can get the United States on their side about sovereignty over the region, is to say that they would offer recognizing Israel as a sovereign nation, in return getting that recognition for their control over the region. And I find that terrifying and interesting because more and more it's becoming obvious that these right-wing governments in these nations say that they are against the apartheid that is happening in Israel up until the point they create their own apartheid. Then they just want to be a part of the club. And allowing for this to happen sets a precedent that is unbelievably dangerous and can spearhead a level of instability both in the Middle East and in North Africa, or Africa in general, that can lead to millions of people dying and suffering. Now, the United States is a lot of things on the international front. The United States is the police of the international stage. They are the imperialist force on the international stage, the enabler of imperialistic forces and dictatorships on the international stage, and the arms dealer on the international stage. And I am interested to see how the Biden-Harris administration responds and molds itself, because it's obvious that they're tailoring this administration to be an Obama presidency part trois, right? And a lot of the people in this cabinet are war hawks. A lot of these people in this cabinet are very much for the sell and armament of as many people as possible, because that's where the money is. And that only breeds further destabilization. And eventually, that destabilization is going to blow back like it has in several other countries. We have experienced this before. We have seen this before. And the fact that the Biden-Harris administration is hell-bent on making things business as usual leads me to believe that the future in this region is dire. And a lot of blood is going to be shed simply for capitalistic gains. And I also want to note that we have to pay attention to the rhetoric that's surrounding the Biden-Harris administration, because what I'm seeing outside of this situation is that the plutocrats, the neoliberals, are using identity politics as well as the allure of representation as a shield to hide away any type of criticism that might be waged against Biden and specifically against Harris. So you see this whole girl boss, she covers all these historical categories of being the first of 17 different things in the vice presidency seat. And because of that, she is beyond reproach. Because of that, Biden is beyond reproach. And that simply cannot happen, especially when you consider the majority of the people in the Polisario Front are women. This is a woman-led fight for independence and sovereignty. And here we will have an administration with a girl boss who has surrounded herself with war hawks that are going to promote the ability to squash that woman-led movement. And when that happens, we are going to see a lot of people who are girl bossing it up and yes, we can, and their asses off, explain away why it would be okay to facilitate this level of atrocity in Western Sahara. And I think we need to be cognizant of that now, as soon as possible. And we need to cultivate a way to neutralize that thinking the best that we can, especially against mainstream media, because if we've learned anything from the Obama administration, it's that it can be very easy to manufacture consent when people are comfortable. When people think that they don't have to worry about the superficial, crazy, cartoonish level bullshit of racism, they check out. Or if they're not checked out and they're checked in, they're busy trying to explain away why this is okay now, when you know otherwise it wouldn't have been. We have seen this pendulum swing from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump and soon to Biden. And I hope this disillusionment that more people have over neoliberalism and the Democratic Party maintains, so that that type of messaging and that type of rhetoric and that type of strategy is no longer effective, or at the very least, less effective than it was between 2008 and 2016. So if you have further interest in what's going on in Western Sahara, I will be dropping a link of Democracy Now's documentary that they were able to provide in 2016, as well as their current reporting on the situation that's happening in the region. And I have been your friendly neighborhood haven. And you can find me on Twitter at Haven the Haitian. And if you have any other topics that you feel is being ignored and would like to be covered, feel free to drop your ideas at whereitcountspod@gmail.com. I appreciate you rocking with me, and I hope that you are good to yourself and good to others. Peace.